The rain came down in torrents, streaking the cafe's windows with silver as Evelyn Sinclair stepped inside, her blonde hair damp but still radiant. She was an enigma, her presence commanding every eye. Among them was Nathan, his brush-stained hands pausing mid-motion as he rearranged pastries behind the counter. He watched her remove her coat with an elegance that seemed otherworldly. Evelyn noticed him, his youthful face alight with curiosity. Their exchange was effortless. A brief inquiry about the storm outside evolved into a shared table, a conversation over steaming cappuccinos. She spoke of art with a passion that awakened something dormant in Nathan. He described his dream of painting something truly meaningful. His voice trembling with conviction, their meetings became frequent. Evelyn's graceful world collided with Nathan's raw enthusiasm. At first, she hesitated, unsure of the intensity she felt. He was only 22, barely a man by society's standards. Yet his admiration for her was intoxicating. One evening, after a gallery opening where Nathan's work was displayed, they walked along the moonlit beach. The waves whispered secrets as he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. She froze but didn't pull away. His voice was low, trembling. "Evelyn, you're not just beautiful, you're everything I've been searching for." Their first kiss was electric, igniting a fire Evelyn hadn't felt in decades. That night, in the sanctuary of her oceanfront estate, their connection deepened. Nathan traced the lines of her body, worshipping every inch with reverence. Evelyn's vulnerability melted away under his touch, her desires no longer shackled by societal expectations, but the world outside wasn't as kind. Whispers spread in their small town, an older widow with a young artist. Evelyn faced judgment from friends who questioned her morality. Nathan struggled with his own insecurities, doubting his worthiness of her love. Their passion burned, but it came with shadows. One fateful evening, Evelyn confessed the depths of her past pain, years spent in a loveless marriage, her husband's cold indifference, and her silent longing for freedom. Nathan, in turn, revealed his fear of losing her, his voice cracking as he admitted, "You've given me more than I ever thought I deserved." Their love became a defiance of time and tradition. Each stolen moment, whether in her art-filled study or his paint-splattered studio, was a declaration of their bond. Yet, as the stakes rose, so did the challenges. Would they have the strength to embrace a love that dared to defy the rules? The answer lay in Evelyn's decision. At a gala where Nathan unveiled a painting inspired by her, a masterpiece capturing her soul in vivid strokes, she stood before the crowd. His hand in hers. She declared, her voice steady, "Love isn't bound by age. It's bound by courage." The room fell silent, but Evelyn no longer cared. She had found in Nathan what she had searched for her entire life, passion, freedom, and a love worth fighting for. Together, they faced the world, their desires unyielding against the tides of judgment. Evelyn and Nathan's declaration at the gala shocked the room into silence. For a moment, it seemed the world had paused, the weight of judgment bearing down on them. But then, a single clap broke through the tension, followed by another. Slowly, applause filled the hall. It was a tentative acceptance, but Evelyn knew this was only the beginning of their battle. Later that night, as they returned to Evelyn's seaside estate, the weight of the evening hung over them. Nathan poured wine, his hands trembling slightly. Evelyn noticed but said nothing, unsure if it was from excitement or fear. The storm outside mirrored the brewing conflict in their lives, lightning illuminating their faces as they sat in the dimly lit living room. "I'm proud of you," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the storm outside. "You didn't have to do that, but you did." Evelyn smiled softly, reaching for his hand. "I've lived too long in the shadows, Nathan. You've reminded me what it means to feel alive." Their intimacy deepened that night, the storm raging as they explored each other with a passion that was both tender and desperate. Yet, as Nathan slept beside her, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something wasn't right. The next morning brought more than just the remnants of the storm. As Evelyn opened her laptop to check her emails, a chill ran down her spine. A message from an unknown sender appeared in her inbox. The subject line reading, "Do you think the past is truly buried?" Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard before opening the email. The body contained only a single sentence, "You can't hide what you've done, Evelyn." Attached was a photo of her late husband, Charles Sinclair, standing in the very hallway of the mansion where he had died. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She had always maintained that Charles's death was natural, a heart attack that struck suddenly, but she had secrets even Nathan didn't know. Secrets she thought had been buried with her husband. "Nathan," she called, her voice shaking. He appeared moments later, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" She showed him the email, her hand trembling. Nathan frowned, leaning closer. This could be someone trying to scare you. Maybe a family member who didn't get what they wanted after Charles passed." But Evelyn wasn't convinced. She felt the weight of her past creeping in, threatening to destroy the fragile happiness she had built with Nathan. As days passed, more emails followed. Each one contained cryptic messages, grainy photos of Evelyn and Charles, and even images of her and Nathan together. Someone was watching them, one evening, as Nathan worked late at his studio. Evelyn ventured into the basement, a place she hadn't entered in years. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of forgotten things. She flicked on the light and found a trunk she had hidden away long ago. Inside were mementos of her marriage, photos, letters, and a journal. As she flipped through the pages, her breath caught. There, in Charles's handwriting, were entries describing his suspicions about her fidelity. "She thinks I don't know. But I do. Evelyn will pay for her betrayal." Evelyn's heart raced as she recalled the final weeks of Charles's life. He had grown paranoid, accusing her of things she hadn't done, yet his death had been so sudden, so convenient. Had someone else known about his suspicions? Or was Charles's death not as natural as she believed? When Nathan returned that night, he found Evelyn in tears, the journal clutched to her chest. "I don't know who's doing this," she whispered, "but they know something about Charles's death. Something I don't." Nathan held her close, promising to protect her, but Evelyn could see the doubt in his eyes. Was he starting to question her, to realize that their love would be tested not just by society but by a force far darker than either of them had imagined? Evelyn's hands trembled as she stopped the recording, Charles's voice echoing in her ears like a ghost resurrected. She looked at Nathan, who stood frozen, his youthful face pale in the dim candlelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Evelyn's heart raced, her mind spinning with questions she dared not voice. If Charles had orchestrated this torment, then who was carrying out his will now? Nathan moved closer, his hand brushing hers in a gesture meant to reassure, but Evelyn flinched. The fear in her eyes sent a pang of doubt through him. "Do you think someone else is involved?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, unable to trust her own voice. Together, they listened to the tape again, straining to catch every detail. Charles's final words were venomous. "You will feel what it's like to be haunted by regret, Evelyn. By guilt. By me." The following nights grew darker, the air in the mansion thick with an oppressive dread. Evelyn started seeing fleeting shadows in the mirrors, hearing her name whispered in empty rooms. Nathan tried to brush it off, attributing it to her frayed nerves, but he couldn't explain the cold that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. One night, as they lay entwined in bed, the storm outside howling against the windows, Evelyn woke to find Nathan gone. Panic surged through her as she called his name, her voice echoing through the cavernous halls. She found him in the study, standing rigid, his back to her. A candle flickered on the desk, casting long, menacing shadows. "Nathan." Her voice was hesitant, trembling. He didn't respond. When she reached out to touch his shoulder, he spun around abruptly, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "I saw him," Nathan choked out. "I saw." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Nathan wasn't one to scare easily, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. He pointed to the far corner of the room, where the faint outline of a figure lingered for just a moment before vanishing into the darkness. Evelyn clutched Nathan, her mind racing. Could Charles's ghost truly be haunting them, or was someone playing an elaborate, malevolent game? Their intimacy became a refuge, a desperate escape from the growing terror around them. Each touch was electric, a reminder that they were still alive, still human, despite the shadows encroaching on their lives. Yet, even in their most passionate moments, Evelyn felt the weight of unseen eyes, the haunting suspicion that they were not alone. The emails continued, each one more sinister than the last. One night, an attachment arrived, a video of Nathan painting in his studio. The angle suggested it was filmed from inside the room, but Nathan swore he'd been alone. Evelyn's unease deepened as the next email contained a clip of her sleeping, the camera hovering inches from her face. Desperate for answers, they contacted a private investigator, an old friend of Nathan's father. He arrived with a calm demeanor, his skepticism evident. "Hauntings can be fabricated," he said. "Let's find out who's pulling the strings." The investigation uncovered chilling details. Charles had a secret room hidden behind the basement wall, filled with old photographs, documents, and tapes. Among them was a file labeled contingency plan. Inside were instructions for someone, a third party, to continue tormenting Evelyn after his death. The final line read, "Her suffering will be eternal." The investigators' discovery only deepened the mystery. Who was carrying out Charles's plan? Why was Nathan now being targeted? The tension between them escalated as Nathan began to question Evelyn's role in her husband's death. "Are you sure there's nothing?" he asked one night, his voice laced with suspicion. Evelyn's temper flared. "You think I did this? You think I killed him?" The crack in her voice betrayed her pain, but Nathan couldn't shake the doubt gnawing at him. Their love, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield. The shadows in the mansion seemed to grow darker, the whispers louder. One night, Evelyn woke to find herself alone in bed again. She searched for Nathan, her heart pounding, only to find him in the basement, staring at the hidden room. Inside, the investigator lay lifeless, his face frozen in terror. Blood pooled around him, and scrawled on the wall in thick, crimson letters were the words, "You can't escape me." Nathan turned to Evelyn, his eyes wide with accusation. This can't be a coincidence." Evelyn felt the walls closing in, her mind a storm of panic and grief. "I didn't do this, Nathan. You have to believe me." But Nathan's faith in her was crumbling. The mansion became a prison, its walls echoing with screams, its halls littered with secrets Evelyn could no longer keep. The final twist came when Evelyn found an envelope under her pillow, marked with Charles's seal. Inside was a single photograph, Nathan, standing beside Charles, both of them smiling. On the back, in Charles's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "He was always mine." Evelyn stared at the photo, her world shattering. Nathan, who had brought light into her life, was somehow tied to Charles's dark plan. As she confronted him, his expression shifted from fear to something colder, something cruel. "I didn't want you to find out this way," Nathan said, his voice low, menacing. "But Charles made sure I'd see this through. You're mine, Evelyn." Just as he intended. The storm outside raged as Evelyn realized the depth of her betrayal. The man she had given her heart to had been part of Charles's plan all along, a pawn in a twisted game of control and vengeance. And now, she was trapped, caught between her dead husband's ghost and the lover who had become her worst nightmare. Evelyn staggered back, her breath caught in her throat as Nathan stepped closer, his demeanor shifting to something unfamiliar and terrifying. The warmth she once found in his gaze was gone, replaced by a cold determination. Her mind raced to make sense of what she had just heard. Was Nathan truly a pawn in Charles's scheme, or was he orchestrating this entire nightmare himself? Nathan reached out, his touch no longer tender but possessive, sending a chill through Evelyn's body. "You don't have to fight this," he murmured, his voice low, almost hypnotic. "Charles may be gone, but his influence lives on, through me. And through us." Evelyn pulled away, her heart hammering in her chest. "I don't believe you," she spat, though a part of her feared it was true. She needed answers, but she also needed to survive. She ran from the room, her bare feet slipping on the cold marble floor as Nathan's voice echoed behind her, calm yet menacing. "You can't run, Evelyn. This house won't let you." The mansion seemed alive, its labyrinthine halls twisting into unfamiliar paths. Doors that once led to safety now opened into pitch-black voids, and the once familiar scent of lavender now carried a metallic tang of blood. Evelyn found herself in the hidden room again, the investigator's body gone. But the bloodied message still scrawled on the wall. A sound behind her made her whirl around, her back pressing against the cold stone. It was Nathan, but his expression was different, haunted, almost as if he were battling something within himself. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." For a moment, Evelyn saw the Nathan she had fallen for, the young man filled with passion and vulnerability. But the moment passed, and his face twisted with anguish. "He's in my head, Evelyn. Charles. He's making me do this. Fight him anymore." Evelyn's mind spun. Could Charles's influence truly be that powerful, even in death? Or was Nathan simply using his memory as a shield for his own dark desires? She didn't have time to ponder as the air around them grew heavy, the room plunging into an unnatural chill. A voice, low and guttural, filled the space. It wasn't Nathan's, and it wasn't entirely human. "You thought you could escape me, Evelyn. You thought you could bury the past. But I will consume everything you love." Nathan dropped to his knees, clutching his head as if trying to block out the voice. Evelyn's instinct was to run, but she couldn't leave him like this, not when he seemed just as much a victim as she was. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Fight it, Nathan. You're stronger than him." His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw clarity. But then his expression darkened, his lips curling into a twisted smile that wasn't his own. "Why fight what feels so good?" he whispered, his hands gripping her wrists with a strength that made her wince. Evelyn's heart shattered as she realized the man she loved was slipping away, his body now a vessel for Charles's vengeance. But she wasn't ready to give up. Summoning every ounce of courage, she leaned in, her lips brushing against Nathan's ear. "If you want me, Charles, come and take me yourself." The room seemed to convulse, the shadows growing denser as an unearthly roar filled the air. Nathan's body convulsed, his grip loosening as he collapsed to the floor. Evelyn stumbled back, her eyes wide as a ghostly figure began to materialize, a twisted, spectral version of Charles, his face a grotesque mask of rage and triumph. "You always underestimated me," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "But even in death, you'll never have—" Evelyn and Nathan emerged from the burning room, but the sense of relief was fleeting. The mansion groaned around them, as if alive and angered by their defiance. Shadows slithered along the walls, whispering curses in voices that sounded both ancient and eerily familiar. Evelyn's grip on Nathan tightened, her heart pounding with the realization that their ordeal was far from over. Nathan leaned heavily against her, still weak, his gaze darting around like a hunted animal. "He's still here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can feel him." The hallways twisted unnaturally, stretching endlessly in impossible directions. They stumbled into a room they didn't recognize, its walls lined with grotesque paintings of mutilated bodies. Each canvas smeared with what looked disturbingly like blood. In the center of the room stood an iron chair fitted with cruel restraints, its surface glistening as if freshly cleaned of something horrific. The door slammed shut behind them, and the temperature plummeted. Evelyn spun around, searching for an escape, but the room seemed to shrink, suffocating them with its oppressive air. A voice echoed, deep and mocking. "Did you really think you could burn me away, Evelyn? My presence is in every brick, every shadow. And now, I will show you what true pain feels like." Nathan screamed, clutching his head as invisible forces yanked him toward the iron chair. He thrashed, but his body betrayed him, moving against his will until he was strapped into the device. The restraints tightened, digging into his flesh, drawing thin lines of blood. Evelyn lunged to stop it, but an unseen force hurled her across the room. She hit the wall hard, her vision blurring as the voice laughed cruelly. "You wanted to feel alive, didn't you, Evelyn? You craved passion, freedom. Let me show you the price of your desires." Nathan's cries of pain shattered her heart as blades emerged from the chair, slicing into his arms and legs with agonizing slaughter. Evelyn and Nathan emerged from the burning room, but the sense of relief was fleeting. The mansion groaned around them, as if alive and angered by their defiance. Shadows slithered along the walls, whispering curses in voices that sounded both ancient and eerily familiar. Evelyn's grip on Nathan tightened, her heart pounding with the realization that their ordeal was far from over. Nathan leaned heavily against her, still weak, his gaze darting around like a hunted animal. "He's still here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can feel him." The hallways twisted unnaturally, stretching endlessly in impossible directions. They stumbled into a room they didn't recognize, its walls lined with grotesque paintings of mutilated bodies. Each canvas smeared with what looked disturbingly like blood. In the center of the room stood an iron chair fitted with cruel restraints, its surface glistening as if freshly cleaned of something horrific. The door slammed shut behind them, and the temperature plummeted. Evelyn spun around, searching for an escape, but the room seemed to shrink, suffocating them with its oppressive air. A voice echoed, deep and mocking. "Did you really think you could burn me away, Evelyn? My presence is in every brick, every shadow. And now, I will show you what true pain feels like." Nathan screamed, clutching his head as invisible forces yanked him toward the iron chair. He thrashed, but his body betrayed him, moving against his will until he was strapped into the device. The restraints tightened, digging into his flesh, drawing thin lines of blood. Evelyn lunged to stop it, but an unseen force hurled her across the room. She hit the wall hard, her vision blurring as the voice laughed cruelly. "You wanted to feel alive, didn't you, Evelyn? You craved passion, freedom. Let me show you the price of your desires." Nathan's cries of pain shattered her heart as blades emerged from the chair, slicing into his arms and legs with agonized bodies mangled, as if they had been pulled from the very paintings they had just escaped. "You will not leave," the figures chanted in unison, their voices hollow and cold. "He demands your pain." Evelyn gritted her teeth, her hands trembling as she picked up a jagged piece of metal from the floor. "Then come and take it," she hissed, her voice filled with defiance. The figures lunged, and chaos erupted. Evelyn fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, slashing and stabbing at the monstrosities as they clawed at her and Nathan. Blood sprayed across the walls, the metallic scent overwhelming as the hallway turned into a battlefield of violence and desperation. Nathan, though weakened, joined the fight, his eyes burning with a determination that mirrored Evelyn's. Together, they pushed through the onslaught, their bodies battered and bloodied but unyielding. Finally, they reached the front door, which stood slightly ajar, as if mocking their struggle. Evelyn shoved it open, the cool night air hitting her face like a blessing. She pulled Nathan outside, collapsing onto the grass as the mansion behind them roared with an unearthly sound. The structure began to crumble, consumed by the fire and the darkness within. As it collapsed, the screams of the voice and the figures echoed into the night, fading into silence as the mansion was reduced to rubble. Evelyn and Nathan lay there, their bodies broken but alive, staring up at the starlit sky. Evelyn and Nathan lay sprawled on the wet grass, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and pain as the mansion behind them collapsed into a smoldering heap. Smoke and ash rose into the air, blending with the eerie glow of the moon. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their labored breaths. Evelyn clutched Nathan tightly, her fingers sticky with his blood. "We made it," Nathan whispered hoarsely, though his voice carried no relief. His pale face betrayed the dread that lingered in his heart, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air still carried a sinister weight, as if the malevolent force they had tried to escape hadn't been destroyed but merely unleashed. Her fears were confirmed when a faint, guttural laugh echoed through the night. She shot upright, scanning the desolate landscape. The laughter grew louder, coming from the shadows of the surrounding forest. Dark figures emerged, their faces obscured by crude, blood-stained masks fashioned from scraps of leather and bone. Each carried weapons, rusty cleavers, serrated knives, and brutal makeshift tools dripping with malice. "Did you think you could leave?" One of them growled, their voice distorted and guttural. "The house may be gone, but its curse lives in us. And now, you'll feed it." Before Evelyn could react, the figures charged. She screamed as one tackled her to the ground, pinning her arms while another yanked Nathan away, dragging him toward a rusted truck parked at the edge of the forest. Nathan thrashed, his cries of pain and terror ringing out as he was restrained with barbed wire. Evelyn fought desperately, biting and scratching her captor, but a third figure struck her across the face with the blunt end of a machete. Stars burst in her vision, and she crumpled to the ground, her head throbbing with searing pain. When she regained consciousness, she was in a decrepit barn lit by a single flickering bulb. The stench of rot and blood was overwhelming, and her arms were bound above her head with chains that bit into her wrists. Nathan hung across from her, suspended in a similar fashion. His shirt was torn, and deep, jagged cuts marred his chest and arms. The masked figures circled them, their weapons gleaming menacingly in the dim light. One stepped forward, their mask adorned with jagged teeth. "Welcome to our feast," they sneered. "The mansion birthed us, gave us purpose. And tonight, we honor it with your pain." Without warning, a figure lashed out at Nathan with a barbed whip. He screamed as the sharp edges tore into his flesh, leaving bloody welts that oozed crimson. Evelyn shrieked, struggling against her chains, but it was no use. "Stop. Please." She begged, her voice raw with desperation. Another figure approached her, holding a pair of rusted pliers. They grabbed her hand, forcing her fingers apart with brutal strength. Evelyn's screams pierced the air as they tore out one of her fingernails, the pain blinding and all-consuming. Blood dripped down her hand, pooling on the dirt floor. The torture continued, relentless and sadistic. Nathan's cries grew weaker as they carved symbols into his skin with jagged knives, the blood flowing freely down his trembling body. Evelyn was subjected to further torment, her body battered and broken as the masked figures reveled in their cruelty. But amidst the agony, Evelyn's mind burned with a singular thought: escape. She forced herself to focus, scanning the room for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on a hook dangling from a nearby wall, its sharp edge glinting faintly. Waiting for the moment when her tormentors were distracted, she swung her body violently, the chains creaking under the strain. She kicked at the hook, finally managing to snag it on her bindings. With every ounce of her remaining strength, she pulled, the sharp edge slicing into the sound of the chains snapping startled the masked figures. Evelyn dropped to the ground, landing hard on her knees but quickly scrambling to her feet. Grabbing the hook, she lunged at the nearest figure, plunging it into their throat. Blood sprayed across her face as they gurgled and collapsed. The others reacted instantly, but Evelyn was already moving, her adrenaline fueling her. She swung the hook wildly, catching another figure in the eye. They screamed, clutching their face as she ran to Nathan, desperately working to free him from his chains. The remaining figures closed in, their weapons raised. Evelyn grabbed a knife from one of their fallen comrades and turned to face them, her eyes blazing with fury. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation, slashing and stabbing as the barn descended into chaos. Nathan, finally free, joined her, wielding a broken piece of wood as a makeshift weapon. Together, they tore through their captors, the barn echoing with screams and the wet, sickening sounds of flesh being torn and bones breaking. When the last figure fell, their masks split open to reveal a hollow, rotted face. Evelyn and Nathan stood amidst the carnage, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and rage. Blood dripped from their hands, pooling around them in a grotesque tableau of survival. But as they stumbled out of the barn, the forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. Faint whispers filled the air, the voices of the cursed mansion's victims calling out for vengeance. Evelyn realized with chilling clarity that their ordeal was far from over. The curse wasn't bound to a place, it was alive, feeding on their pain, and it would follow them wherever they went. Evelyn and Nathan staggered through the dense forest, their bodies aching and bleeding from countless wounds. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of distorted voices mocking their escape. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting and shifting like grotesque figures stalking them. Evelyn gripped the bloodied knife tightly, her knuckles white, determined not to let fear consume her. Behind them, the faint glow of the burning barn painted the sky an ominous red, but the cursed whispers were unrelenting. The sensation of being watched clawed at their sanity. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. They both knew the masked killers weren't merely human, there was something far darker driving them. Something inhuman that tied them to the mansion's curse. The forest suddenly opened to a clearing, revealing an ancient, decrepit church. Its stained glass windows were shattered, and its steeple leaned at an unnatural angle, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. Nathan hesitated, but Evelyn pulled him forward. "Sanctuary," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and desperation. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, and a heavy silence replaced the whispers. The church interior was a horrifying contrast to its sacred purpose. Bloodstains marred the pews, and strange symbols were carved into the stone walls. At the altar, a grotesque statue loomed, a figure with a skeletal body. Hollow eyes, and an outstretched hand holding a twisted blade. "This is where it started," Evelyn said, realization dawning on her. Nathan stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "The curse. The mansion, the killers, they're bound to this place. If we destroy it, we end this nightmare." Before Nathan could respond, the doors slammed shut behind them, and the masked killers emerged from the shadows. Their weapons gleamed, and their heavy breaths echoed in the cold air. Evelyn raised the knife, her body trembling but resolute. The killers advanced slowly, savoring the fear in their victims. Evelyn acted first, charging at the closest figure with a primal scream. The knife plunged into their chest, but they didn't fall. Instead, they grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully. Nathan lunged forward, breaking a wooden pew to create a makeshift stake, which he drove through the figure's neck. The killer crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The others attacked with brutal force. Evelyn and Nathan fought with every ounce of strength they had left. The battle was savage. Evelyn's knife slashed through flesh, and Nathan's stake impaled another assailant. Blood splattered the church walls as their screams filled the air. The masked killers seemed endless, but as each one fell, their bodies disintegrated into ash. Evelyn realized they weren't just killing the physical forms, they were destroying the essence of the curse. Amidst the chaos, the grotesque statue at the altar began to glow, its hollow eyes filling with an eerie red light. The remaining killers seemed to draw strength from it, their attacks growing more frenzied. Evelyn and Nathan were forced back, cornered against the altar. "We have to destroy it," Evelyn yelled, pointing to the statue. Nathan nodded, using his last reserves of strength to fend off the attackers. Evelyn climbed onto the altar, gripping her knife tightly. She drove the blade into the statue's chest. But it barely made a dent. Desperation surged through her as she searched for a weak point. The statue's hand, the one holding the twisted blade, seemed to pulse with energy. Evelyn grabbed the blade, ignoring the searing pain as it burned her hands. She yanked it free, and the statue let out a deafening, inhuman scream. The killers froze mid-attack, their bodies convulsing as black smoke poured from their masks. Evelyn raised the blade high and plunged it into the statue's head. The church erupted in blinding light, and a shockwave sent Evelyn and Nathan flying. When they opened their eyes, the killers were gone, their masks lying in piles of ash. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Nathan helped Evelyn to her feet, their bodies battered but alive. They stumbled out of the church, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The whispers were gone, the forest silent except for the sound of birds beginning to chirp. As they reached the edge of the forest, Nathan collapsed to his knees, laughing weakly. It's over, he said, tears streaming down his face. Evelyn knelt beside him, resting her forehead against his. We survived, she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They walked back to town, leaning on each other for support. The seaside air felt like a balm against their wounds, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they allowed themselves to hope. Months later, they stood on the boardwalk, hand in hand, watching the waves crash against the shore. The scars on their bodies were a testament to their ordeal, but their spirits had healed. Together, they had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious. Evelyn looked at Nathan, a soft smile on her lips. We defeated the darkness, she said. And now, we can live. Nathan kissed her, his love for her unshakable. As the sun set over the horizon, they knew their journey had forged an unbreakable bond. They had not only survived, they had found a love strong enough to conquer even the darkest of evils.